Released in the year 2000, Nevermore's Dead Heart in a Dead World marked a major step for the Seattle metal band. It's a spectacular-sounding shot at glory that still sounds immense today. Produced, mixed, and mastered by Andy Sneap, it's Nevermore's Dead Heart in a Dead World, plus a bunch of other Nevermore records too. Tonight on Sounds Pretty Grim. Nevermore has been on my short list of bands that I wanted to feature on this show from day one, but I had a very difficult time choosing which Nevermore album I was going to feature for this episode. 1999's Dreaming Neon Black is my personal favorite. I think 2005's This Godless Endeavor might be their best, but 2000's Dead Heart in a Dead World is their big breakthrough, their most accessible, and perhaps their most influential. And it was the right album at the right time for the band, their chance to prove whether they could perform in the big top of the early 2000s metal circus. This also makes it somewhat polarizing among Nevermore fans, and thus that much more interesting to discuss. But I'm still going to talk about a bunch of their albums, so... Following the breakup of Seattle metal band Sanctuary, former members, vocalist Warrell Dane and bassist Jim Shepard, joined with Sanctuary live guitarist Jeff Loomis to form Nevermore. They brought on drummer Van Williams during the recording of their 1995 self-titled debut, a nice slice of dramatic, gothic-tinged progressive power metal that covers a lot of stylistic ground. Even at this early stage, Nevermore already had the basis of their signature vibe. This was quickly followed by 1996's moody In Memory EP and the full album The Politics of Ecstasy. Heavy, much more experimental, and occasionally kinda weird. In 1999, the band released their ambitious concept album Dreaming Neon Black. This is a much gloomier, more depressing, and more gothic and dramatic record, which would probably explain why it's the album that got me into Nevermore. This was their final release with Grammy Award-winning producer Neil Kernan. This is their finest work together. Nice, snappy drums, a solid foundation of low-end, big quadruple-tracked rhythm guitars, and this album in particular has a lot of moody and atmospheric flourishes that are woven in naturally and seamlessly.
We are the architects of fate.
There's plenty of heavy material on here. Beyond Within, I Am the Dog, The Fault of the Flesh, Nevermore at their sharpest. But it's the somber, slower stuff, the Lotus Eaters, the title track, Cenotaph, and Forever, that give this album its bleak and dark vibe. Nevermore's flexing their creativity and digging into their more prog metal influences here, but it never feels self-indulgent. Even the longer, gloomy, and depressing sections are in service of the overall narrative, and that gives it its own momentum as the album unfolds. This album is an hour long, but it does not feel its length. There's some softer, more sparse pieces, but there's no lulls. This is an ambitious album from a band that's just on the verge of breaking through to that next level. The album's overarching story centers on a man who's overcome with grief to the point of lunacy over the loss of his beloved. In his dream, she's calling out to him from the depths of murky waters. It was inspired by the singer's recurring nightmare about a former romantic interest who in real life had gone missing and was presumed dead, though it wasn't until 2003 that her remains were found, confirming that she had been a victim of the so-called truck stop killer. It's a strange story, and suffice to say, it's a dark album, but lovely too.
The clock spins to time that must mean nothing. Meet me in the dreamtime water drown. Shifting, shaping currents flowing memories. Meet me in the drowning pool of tears and wash away my innocence and
Van Williams' drums sound punchy and natural. Jim Shepard's bass is present and strong. There's tight and heavy guitars, as well as effect-heavy, atmospheric cleans and leads. Joining Loomis on guitar for this album is Tim Calvert, rest in peace, who, after touring with Nevermore for Dreaming Neon Black, left the heavy metal circus and lived out his days as a commercial airline pilot. And finally, vocalist Warrell Dane, who always brings drama and style with his operatic training and evident goth rock influences, really shines on this album, effortlessly transitioning from high-pitched power metal to menacing snarls to low-tuned gloomy crooning. His vocal work has always been strong, from way back in the Sanctuary days, but Dreaming Neon Black sees him firmly planting himself as not just a vocalist, but a frontman. And with that, all the pieces are in place for Nevermore to go big. Released in 2000, Dead Heart in a Dead World was a dramatic shift in sound for the band. They pared back down to 4 members, the guitars tuned way down, now with 7 strings, and the tempos generally slowed down to almost a heavy rock feeling at times. This is Nevermore taking a stab at the big time, or at least the big time of early 2000s metal. I don't know, a video on uranium or whatever. Dreaming Neon Black sold well and opened a lot of doors, and this was a pivotal moment for the band. And they're really putting in the effort to show that the band is completely capable of pulling off an album like this, a showcase, with slick, exciting production, but still capturing the essence of what the band's about. It's their most accessible album, like with a bit of trimming, any of the songs were potential singles, and several destined to be crowd favorites. Which makes it interesting. This is Nevermore really going for it, just stuffing the album with strong material and resulting in Nevermore's version of a great sounding, rock-leaning, but still very metal record.
today the warning came in the flood. Architects and fools never cared for poor man's blood. Curse to repeat the past they are. The river dragon swims upstream. They built another wall.
It's certainly not their heaviest in terms of speed and technical stuff, but it is heavy in terms of having weight to it. The new lower tuning melds well with the more metal ballad-style songs, but Loomis's guitar sounds ferocious on the faster material like Engines of Hate and the title track. But it's Nevermore through and through, unmistakably so. Unlike Dreaming Neon Black, this is not a concept album, and it dips into many of Nevermore's usual darker palette. Religion and the hypocrisy therein, a tenuous grip on sanity, inequality in our justice system, human folly in general, and so on. A sharp contrast to Dreaming Neon Black's more singularly focused, overarching storyline, Dead Heart is much more straightforward. But as such, it's less adventurous in its song structures and instrumentation. Produced and mixed by legendary metal producer Andy Sneap, and this is one of his earlier ones too, and one of Sneap's first to be recorded via Pro Tools software. Sneap is extremely well known in the metal world for a very specific and big sound. And just like the songs, the sound of Dead Heart is this big whiz-bang tour de force. It's not cluttered or complicated or overproduced, but it's an opulent, hyped sound that's still compelling with performances as strong as those from Nevermore. Van Williams' drums are a lot more dressed up, with some very impactful triggered samples blended in. They add an extra dimension, though. The performance is there, but the drums cut through. That snare's up front and comes out of the speakers a bit. Those toms on Evolution 169 envelop you. With the band returning to a four-piece, Jeff Loomis handles all rhythm and lead guitars, which sound fantastic. He gets a lot of well-deserved props for his lead guitar work with Nevermore and more recently Arch Enemy, and it's really put on display here on Dead Heart. But it's his rhythm guitar work, his writing and his riffing, his speed and precision on the ridiculous heavy low strings that really stand out here, at least to me. I can't stress enough how much I loved the sound of the guitars on this album and some of Nevermore's later albums as well, to the point where I had to know, like, what does this guy play? Oh, a 7-string with EMG 707s. Okay, got it. I suck though. Jim Shepard's bass has no problem competing with the new lower guitar tuning. Strong present bass guitar has always been such an important part of Nevermore's sound, and regardless of what trends are happening elsewhere in metal, every Nevermore album has rock-solid bass. This is a pretty loud album in terms of dynamics, but Sneap's mixing style stands up very well against more modern, aggressive mastering levels. Too much digital limiting kind of deadens things, dulls the impact, so that little extra dimension and pop in the mix goes a long way. Sneap is especially well known in the metal mixing communities in particular for being very accessible early on, and sharing a lot of tips and tricks and mixing philosophies online. Back in the early days of home recording, when for the first time, through fancy new software, amateurs had access to the same exact tools as the pros. Having a pro just kind of divulging his wisdom on such genre-specific topics to all us regular schlubs, I think had a significant effect on how the sound of metal evolved well into the 2000s. Like, everybody knows what you mean when you say the Andy Sneap guitar thing. While it's certainly not regarded as the most aggressive Nevermore album, Barnburners like We Disintegrate and the blistering title track bring the energy levels high, as does the satisfyingly heavy cover version of Simon & Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence. Now, this is my favorite kind of cover song. Respectful to the original, but it nevertheless sounds like a Nevermore song. It fits right into the album, and if you somehow didn't know it was a cover, you wouldn't suspect anything. It's one of my go-to examples of a great cover version, and I'm surprised it never became an internet meme.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
Believe in Nothing was an obvious choice for a lead single, a heavy rock anthem with some lovely acoustic bits. Though the gloomier but equally sweeping Insignificant would have been just as good, or the epic The Heart Collector, which really makes you want to put your lighter up. Awesome song, get out. Once again, lovely artwork from graphic artist Travis Smith, who's created the artwork for some seriously classic albums. But Nevermore's Dead Heart in a Dead World, one of the best sounding metal albums from this era, hasn't aged a day in a quarter century, and it's a classic Nevermore record. Released in 2003, the follow-up Enemies of Reality is an overall heavier album than Dead Heart. Sonically, it was definitely a departure from Neil Kernan's or Andy Sneap's work and was originally almost overshadowed by its ill-fated launch. Enemies of Reality was produced by Kelly Gray, known for his work with Washington progressive metal band Queensryche, as well as Candlebox's quadruple platinum debut. Here, we have a very energized version of Nevermore, heavier, faster, more complex riffs, branching out from the solid foundation laid on Dead Heart. The sound of the album, as initially released in 2003, however, was not up to the standards of any of its predecessors. It sounded murky. There was an upsetting lack of clarity and definition. It almost sounded mono at times, and like a lot of early 2000s records, the dynamics were poorly managed. Fans were unhappy with the new sound, so much so that in 2005, by popular demand, the entire album was remixed and remastered with deadheartinadeadworld producer Andy Sneap at the helm. I believe Century Media Records even offered a replacement disc for like $5 if you sent in the original version. I kept mine though. And the original gray mix was discontinued and seems to be a rare, though not particularly valuable find. Now I have to say Sneap's version is vastly superior and has certainly aged better. In fact, prior to starting this video, I hadn't listened to the original mix since 2005, and I might never listen to it again. But in Gray's defense, if he was hired to make a record with the kind of mainstream metal sound that was trending circa 2003, then he completely understood the assignment. The early 2000s was an era where a lot of mainstream music could sometimes kinda sound all fucked up, like on a technical level. There was newfangled software and digital mixing technology that allowed everything to be ultra maximized, but engineers were experimenting. Some stuff sounded cool, but a lot of stuff did not. And especially with a band like Nevermore, you want to, at a minimum, be able to hear all of the performances relatively clearly. Although I do have to say that Travis Smith's original cover art is far superior and loses a lot of its wonderfully slimy details when it's flipped negative. They should have just left the great original artwork and slapped a sticker on the cellophane that says, "This is the good version," and just left it at that. But Sneap was back in the producer's chair for 2005's This Godless Endeavor, which is really where Nevermore nailed the balance between the catchier, more anthemic metal that they mastered with Dead Heart and the aggressive, faster, more technically complex metal, sharpened and honed. A heavier sound, more complex riffs, more experimentation, a ballad about a depressed robot. This one has it all. Nevermore's final album, 2010's The Obsidian Conspiracy, produced by Soilworks' Peter Witchers and mixed by Andy Sneap, is another solid entry in the catalog, though it doesn't quite reach the lofty heights set by its predecessors. The band went on hiatus, citing internal struggles following this album. And you can almost hear a creative struggle. The catchier, rock-influenced stuff doesn't blend with the technical and aggressive music quite as well as it did on prior Nevermore efforts. And so ended Nevermore. Though reunion rumors swirled for several years, this was not to be, with the tragic passing of vocalist Warrell Dane in 2017 at age 56. Coincidentally, while I was getting this episode ready, Nevermore became active again, with founding member Jeff Loomis and drummer Van Williams auditioning new members. Or maybe they've already announced the lineup by the time I actually finish editing this. Or maybe they already finished touring by now and they've broken up again. I don't know, these videos take a while to make. But whatever shape it takes, it'll be nice to see renewed interest in the band. Maybe some audiophile quality, higher dynamic range remasters on vinyl. And I'll fucking go see him again, yeah. One more chance to put up a lighter for the Heart Collector. It's been a while.
Nevermore to feel the pain. The Heart Collector sang.
Anyway, thanks for joining me over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore with Nevermore. Next time, I'll be gently rapping at your chamber door with Marilyn Manson's 2000 album, Holywood. Weekly updates on Patreon, that's next time on Sound Pretty Grim.